السلام عليكم جميعا. Today, inshallah, we'll be conducting this session in English, but if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in Arabic or English, and we'll be happy to address them. Building government capabilities for future jobs was initiated as part of the Dubai We Learn cycle. It was a part of the fifth cycle. Dubai We Learn is an initiative launched by the Executive Council of Dubai with the aim of empowering a culture of institutional learning and the transfer and exchange of knowledge between government entities and international experts. This project explored best practices. This project explored best practices for developing a future-ready workforce that can be equipped to deliver high government services in a rapidly changing environment that is filled with ambiguity and complexity. It followed the Dubai We Learn approach, which is referred to as trade. In the first part, they plan the project in the terms of reference, they review the current state, they acquire best practices, they communicate them, and then work on implementing them. And as a fifth stage, evaluate the benchmarking outcomes and the process itself. Today we are having here with us Qais and Subia, part of the team that led this project. That was led by Imam bin Khatem, and we have among the audience today with us some of the team members that were part of this project. And we would like to take this opportunity to ask them to give us a short brief about this project before we kickstart, inshallah.
Good morning. So to start, as the name suggests, the project aims to tackle the challenge of how do you build capabilities with the context and looking at the future jobs. So when you look at the future jobs, there's a lot of uncertainties. So how do you start planning when some of the workforce don't exist today? A lot of the learning and development initiatives focus on current workforce and developing them for succession. But it becomes a little bit more complex with a lot of the changes that's happening because of either technologies and obviously with the fast-paced move after the pandemic. So this project really wants to tackle that question. How do you develop the workforce of the future? So when we say future here, we aim about 5 to 10 years looking ahead. And the main aim of the project focuses on the public sector, but with a key emphasis on the government in particular. So we use the trade methodology to be able to navigate this project. The first step was to first identify the key stakeholders from the government. We wanted to understand the current state of the government, where we are, and then we leverage through benchmarking partners which ones are the most suitable for us that will be able to capture some and learn some of these initiatives to tackle this big question. So a lot of the initiatives are aimed to address how can we find sustainable solutions? So we didn't want just any initiative that we needed to keep repeating. We want to focus on the sustainability of this since it looks at the very long term.
How does this fit in with your existing projects, and why was it launched now?
So the timing is perfect. Obviously, a lot of the Dubai 2030 initiatives focuses on automation and most of the transition that's going to happen in Dubai. In DGHR, we have a few initiatives that relate to this project. Namely, one of them is looking at the future-proofing of the workforce of Dubai in entirety, of the Emirate of Dubai, not just the government. So this project served as a key input to this project. We learn a lot about the government practices, the best practices across the world. So it will benefit us when we start planning the future or strategic planning for the Emirate of Dubai, public, private sector included. Other projects had to do with building the infrastructure, so the job architecture. So obviously part of building the job architecture is designing future jobs. How do you start tackling future jobs and defining them? So this project also served as a key input to it. And the third main project was capability building framework. So when we look at Dubai government, addressing the workforce planning and applying the workforce planning across the government, which was one key initiative. But how do you link this future vision to the learning and development capabilities or requirements of today to building? And these are all existing projects. This project served as a good, solid input to all of those projects.
Thank you, Qais. Subia, future of jobs is a vast area of work. and the results of this can be applied across the board. How did you go about scoping this project, knowing where to start?
Thank you, Saeed. I think one of the key challenges for this project was how do we actually scope the project? I'll refer back to the first speaker, Nelly, when she said that future is not predetermined, it's not written yet. When we talk about future jobs and developing a kind of holistic outlook of future jobs, we are not talking about only HR. We are not talking about one industry. We are talking about cross-departmental, cross-industrial view. So that was very difficult, but what we had done is that we tried to simplify through a rigorous framework. So we used the fishbone diagram. If you look at this fishbone diagrams, we define different main pillars that you can see here in the green headings: future drivers, workforce, technology, future capability, workforce architect, and governance. So these were the main pillars or the major factors that we thought are affecting the future jobs or how the tomorrow's job would look like. Under each pillar, we have different areas or different sub-pillars, as we call them. For example, under future drivers, we have to look at the macro trends. We have to look at the technology. We also had to look at what kind of talent supply we are having and what kind of skills we have in demand. Are we in shortfall of some skills or we are in surplus of some skills? If we are, what are those skills? Where are the surpluses? What are the deficits? So it's a very holistic view that we have developed through this framework.
Could you maybe share a little bit more with us about the workforce architecture? How do we go about upskilling workforce architects or the workforce experience initiatives?
Sure. So just a little bit about the validation process of this framework itself. When we were developing it, initially we had a very big team and we had diversified experience base, not only HR, but also from business, from technology, and so on. So when we went through that, what we had done first, we did a very exhaustive industry research and we looked at different industries that are mainly responsible for Dubai's prosperity because we want Dubai to be a thriving city even in the future. So we looked at that, we tried to validate that. Then we went to different entities and met with different stakeholders at different levels, at leadership levels, and asked them that what are their views? How do they think that the future would look like in terms of jobs parameters? And then finally, we also launched a survey which addressed directly to the employees, asking them that how do they think their job is changing? What kind of impact would it have in future? And what kind of skills do they think they need to acquire? Or are they actually happy with the preparation that for future is going on? So once we completed this whole process, we went back to define our pillars. If you go back to the pillars and you specifically ask about workforce architects, when we wrote these pillars and as we went further in the project, we got more and more clear about it. We meant here the primary target audience over here was the HR people because but it's not limited to HR. It's everybody who is responsible for driving and leading the career of other employees. And that, is often not HR. It's also the organization leaders, it also your direct supervisors, it's all the managers. So in order to, develop and being ready for the future, we need to prepare them first. And that's primarily us, the HR people. Are we ready to make these changes? Do we understand the technology? Do we understand what sort of implication would it have for our workforce? And where should we work more? So that's mainly about the workforce architects, as you asked about.
So you mentioned you've looked into stakeholders internally and externally, employees and organization level. Could you maybe share with us a little bit more about that? How do you go about it?
So the stakeholder validation was mainly when we went at the government level and government entities. If you look at, we divided them into different clusters: the governing entities, regulators, the major Dubai government entities, and also the foresight seekers. So foresight seekers are those entities that are looking at the future and they already have some research or some signals that they can tell us that how Dubai is going to evolve. There is no certainty there, but obviously we we have signals and indicators that would tell us that where the most industry expansion would be, and how the digitalization or technology will affect, what are the geopolitical trends and how it would benefit or threaten the sustainability of Dubai, and what we need to do that. So we consulted with them. We looked at some public sector entities as well. So not only at Dubai government level, but also at federal level. For example, Ministry of Education, which is a very important component in terms of talent supply and development. Based on all our inputs from different sources, we came up with a gap analysis. So again, we looked at different pillars, and then we came up that where are the major gaps? Where are we need to concentrate in terms of skill development? And this came out as the very exhaustive, like obviously it was a very detailed gap analysis, but these are the major areas that we need to work on. For example, lack of policy formulation, because if you have a policy and and implementation skills, ineffective career guidance, lack of talent ecosystem. So you have talent coming in, but do we have different intervals planned for them at the university level, at the employer level, at the coordination level between public and private sector? So those kind of things came across as the major input for the gap analysis.
Thank you, Sobia. Looking at all these best practices you found, guys, can you tell us what were the criteria for assessing these? How did you go about identifying which could be applied in Dubai or in DGHR context, maybe?
Yeah, so first, to tackle the problem of what kind of best practices we needed to identify benchmarking partners. Who do we ask what their best practices are? How can we benefit from them? And then we need to assess the actual criteria. So when it came to the benchmarking partners, we were very conscious of like the 6 pillars we looked at. We needed to cover all of the dimensions based on what we've learned from the gap analysis, where the government stands when it comes to building capabilities for the future. So we needed to make sure that we focus on different domains and cover all of the areas. And obviously, we have to take into consideration how approachable they are. Are they willing to meet with us with the time frame that we conducted? So once we identified those benchmarking partners, we generated a lot of ideas. Approximately, there were at least 53 ideas that came out of this exercise. So how do we figure out which ones are we going to develop? So we had to have high-level criteria to be able to do that. One of those criteria, or the 2 main criteria, were how much impact that these ideas have on the government, whether on the government entity or the whole of government. And the second, how easy is it to implement? And obviously, by part of the easy, we needed to look at are there dependencies between those ideas? So for me to do this, I require a prerequisite for them. And then we started looking at different dimensions. Are there any certain level of urgency for us? So we know as part of DGHR, we have our agenda that is aligned with Dubai government. There are certain projects that require to happen, whether they are in progress. And so the level of urgency, depending on this criteria, was taken into consideration. And other areas such as Emiratization, any of those fit into the Emiratization planning or impact the Emiratization initiatives that are there. And the last criteria was also extremely important. We were very conscious of the fact that a lot of those ideas might not be within the scope of DGHR as a government entity. So we needed to figure out if some of these initiatives would be owned or carried out by entities other than DGHR. We have limited control. So probably for this project, we wanted to figure out which of those initiatives are within our scope of work, so are under DGHR control, to initiate. Do they fit with our agenda, and etc. So these are the main areas we figured out to pull out, and we made sure also, based on the 6 pillars, we wanted to cover most of the dimensions, whether it's technology related, whether it's focusing on the HR, whether it's focused on governance. We covered most of those areas, and we came up with a short list, approximately 14 initiatives out of the 53.
40 out of the 53 that might be potentially applied throughout DGHR.
Yes, so initially 14 of them were I think 12 of them were approved and 2 of them are still under process, but that still doesn't mean that the other ideas are a no-go. Obviously, because of the nature of those initiatives, Some of them are complex in nature or have prerequisite to happen, so maybe this is not the right time to start with them. And some of them are just outside of our control. For instance, some of those initiatives relate to academia. And when you deal with academia, there are higher entities that would require to plan them. So these can be pushed upwards, so for initiatives or prioritization. So the one we selected are directly related to DGHR, something we can action right away. And out of those 14, 12 were approved, and some of them are in progress already.
That's very exciting to hear. Sobia, what were some of the ideas that you thought were exceptional or that you were mesmerized by?
So, I mean, Dubai is already a very progressive city. We have a lot of advanced ideas and advanced practices in place. If you ask me, was there one good idea that was a real eye opener and we should apply it? There was no magic bullet there. The whole essence of best practices was how different ideas are connected with each other and how do they create a cumulative impact, which is much bigger than its parts. What we learn that in other advanced economies, there is a more solid ecosystem available for talent development on a more dynamic basis. So, for example, and another thing was that we did not really stop till the best practices only. We also built up on those best practices. So, for example, what we have seen, one of the very good practices in other places is the work placement while they study. So, one of the best practices that we came out from Canada, from Waterloo University, it's a norm that students would work for 4 months. They would go in the market, they'll work for 4 months, they'll be paid for that job, they'll come back and do 4 months in study. So by the time they complete a degree, which is 5 year, not a 4 year, they already have a 2 year experience. That was a brilliant practice. But can we directly apply it here? Yes, we can, but it will take some time. Why? Because you would need Ministry of Education to approve such a program. We would need a very strong industry collaboration where industry actually has a mindset to accommodate these young people on 4 months basis, which is mostly the temp jobs. And also they can, they have these jobs in line and they're willing to pay them for the 4 months work. So, but then again, we came up with some ideas that if you connect with the existing practices, they create a very big impact. So, for example, a skill intelligence system, which mainly, if you have a skill intelligence system at organizational level, it only looks at what kind of skills you have in the organization and what are you short of. But let's say you plug it in with the labor market and the labor market skills, then you would have the predictive data, which means that in next 3 years, what kind of skills you are falling short of, what are you in surplus and what are you in deficit. If again you plug in the same database with the academia or the education system, they will have a very valid source of what sort of majors or what sort of programs they need to introduce so that you can reduce the unemployment rate and you have more employable programs or majors or more useful majors and programs. So it's all about developing the ecosystem and connecting different ideas. That was, I think, very important. Another thing was that some of the things that we have seen, we can perhaps come up with a better version with the technology now, with the advancement in technology, and especially Dubai's approach of incubating nascent technology. So, for example, career guidance. So, for how the career guidance given is through the coach, is through maybe a data, video, and so on. But with all this metaverse technology, can I actually take a year 12 student and actually place him in the metaverse and let him experience how the astronaut work looks like? How it may be possible. It may not be possible right now, but it may be possible in 2 years' time with the technology piece. So all those ideas, when you apply it together, make a lot of sense and create a very big impact.
Thank you, Sobia. Qais, you mentioned some of the challenges when it comes to implementing some of the initiatives that were not approved for now and might be approved in the future. You mentioned complexity, you mentioned prerequisites in terms of infrastructure or other projects. Are there any other challenges that you saw throughout these benchmarking practices or ideas?
So a lot of the complexities probably would have to do with obviously there's the big picture, right? So how do you prioritize all of those initiatives, right? And so you have the financial and then strategic prioritization. How do you determine the building blocks? A second one probably would be, how do you get this collaborative effort across the government? We're one government after all, but then you have all of those separate government entities have their own agendas. So I think one of the complexities, I would say, in the nature of the jobs is being able to prioritize. We have government entities from different sectors, different sizes, and different agendas altogether. So can you collaboratively come up with an infrastructure that is, and initiatives that are sustainable and drive it forward? So I think this level of collaboration and prioritization would always be there. And I think one other area is, how do you measure the impact, right? So drawing a baseline, focusing on that, and being able to know what are the outcomes you want to achieve, whether they're engagement, increase in efficiency and productivity, whether it's just being able to having a sustainable solution instead of just investing large sums of money every single time you want to replan. So I think these are the common challenges that we probably need to tackle as a government when we select and move forward.
Thank you, Qais. Maybe this is a nice segue, Sobia, to discuss what were some of the lessons you learned in the project, whether it's precisely in terms of building government capabilities or something that we might be able to apply in different projects.
I think if you ask me to explain the essence of this project, I'll go back to what Nelly said in the first presentation. It's about lifelong learning. So again, now we are talking about having multiple careers in one lifespan. That requires lifelong learning, opening your horizons, and opening the mindset that one needs to be engaged in a lifelong learning for time. I think that's really the essence of the whole project. Also, I think in terms of the project itself, when we work with such diverse team, what I really like that because the team came from different departments and they had different outlook and point of view towards the careers and career planning and jobs, they really cast a fresh eye instead of limiting ourselves to HR only. And I'm saying very freely because we are mostly HR people over here. Instead of just restricting ourselves only to HR, going back to business and understand and getting the input from them is so important because HR does not work in isolation. Third, I think again, which is a very useful thing, is that when you go and look for best practices, you just don't limit it there. You actually ask your team members, the team discussions, the generation of ideas in collaboration is such an effective tool that, many times you're able to come up with something which is absolutely brilliant and actually better than the best practice. So I think this is what I could reflect on my end, but I'm sure Kais has some views as well.
Yeah, I'd echo the focus on the lifelong learning, and the way I saw it was, I find it very interesting, is that shift in culture that could happen within the government. So lifelong learning requires voluntarily from the employees or the people that want to learn to have that initiative. It doesn't really have to cost money. So other than the technology and the effort, there's a cultural shift that might happen. I also like the collaborative approach, the idea that we don't have to silo every single project for each government entity. There is an infrastructure that can be built. One of, for instance, the pain points I feel for the government is analytics in general, right? When we tackle the address, how can we measure the impact? What do we want to achieve? A lot of the times the struggle came is, do we have the data? Are we collecting the right data? Are we able to make meaning of this data to the future? So I think it was very eye-opening that how much emphasis do we need to focus on this analytics capability? And I'm not just talking about employee capability. There's an infrastructure. Am I capturing my processes, the way I work? Am I data-driven? Do we solidify it? So I think these were key lessons for me that we shouldn't underplay them. The more we move forward, the more data becomes much more important for us to be able to deal with the future of work.
Thank you, Sobia and Qais. Do you have maybe any final comments before we open the floor to questions?